What's up, Tyler?
Hey,
How was your 4th of July?
it was hot.
It was
Very
hot.
hot. Hot girl
Everyone's talking
summer.
about everyone's talking about humid, hot, rain. Uh, it was hot. Yeah. Did you see
No,
some?
it was good. I took some time off. I left late Friday, spent until Tuesday afternoon with the girls, and then came home to get back to work Wednesday just because I have a lot going on with that job.
Yeah.
But you took the week off, right?
Yeah, we shut down for the whole week. It's our
Oh,
summer break.
everyone did?
Yeah?
Nice.
Oh, no, I shut everyone and someone reached out and was like, "Do your subs not work, your job sites?" I said, "That's correct. We shut the jobs down. Like, it's
Yeah.
known." Like, "Well, what don't the subs get aggravated?" I'm like, "I don't tell them the day before."
Yeah.
Like,
This
they
is on their
we
schedule.
we know, like, they're not working that day. You know what? Everyone takes time off anyway. So it's like, what happens, yeah, it costs because we pay everyone for that week anyway,
Yeah.
even though but, you know, a ton of people take time off. So then it's a matter of like moving people around, shuffling people, trying to figure out who's doing what and not sure who's going to take time off or if people extend vacations. I'm like, you know what? It's right in the middle of the year. Let's start Q2 with a quick break off, everyone recharge, come back, and we'll do the same thing for Christmas.
Yeah,
So,
it's one of the cabinet companies that I use does the same thing. They take the New Year break and then they take the week off around July 4th, and it's like halfway through the year,
it's
and it's a
perfect.
nice reset for everyone.
Yeah. And it get like I can actually go away and not worry about work or worry about getting a phone call. It's like everyone's off, no one's bothering anyone, and we come back and we're good.
Yeah,
So,
general. It's the same thing as Christmas. People are going away. They want to be able to do
yeah,
their own thing, and like if you're working on their house, not have you there. So it does make sense.
100%. So today we have Austin from Building Culture. He was an apprentice for a previous guest, Clay, that we had, 1,000-year-old house. Um, but they design and build homes with triple wide solid masonry walls.
Yeah, so it's very similar to what Clay does, and he's looking to do something similar where he's developing these communities based on that new urbanism movement, and really building something that's sustainable and durable and more akin to what we built a few hundred years ago. Obviously, with updated technology
Mhm.
and utilities and everything else, but just building a smaller, more traditional style home that will last a very long time.
So we talk about craftsmanship. We talk about his start as an accountant, where he decided to give up that career, take a massive pay cut, in order for him to, explore a, what he later found out to be a passion of his. And we also dig into some building science and discuss, whether or not we should really be building airtight homes.
Yeah, I enjoyed speaking with him. I had not met him before. I was unaware of who he was, but when I started looking him up and I listened to a couple of podcasts with him, he's very well spoken, um, super informative, very knowledgeable, and just very enthusiastic about what he's
Super.
doing, which is just I love talking to people like that. I mean, you could talk to me about something that I am not interested in whatsoever. I mean, I am interested in this, but if somebody is just into what they're doing and loving what they're doing, it's very contagious and it makes for a great conversation.
Hell yeah. Let's get into it.
Cool.
But before we do, word to our sponsors. Hey, homeowners are asking for more and more glass in their homes. That's, I mean, a known fact, right? More views, more sunshine means larger windows, more expansive doors to bring in the outdoors into their indoors. Sometimes it can be hard to know which windows can meet those dimensions.
But have no fear because at andersenwindows.com, they have a fast and easy tool called Find My Size. You can find it in the For Pros section of their website.
So all you got to do is enter your dimensions, and Andersen will tell you within their standard sizes which windows or door styles in which series will meet your opening. That includes large casement windows. That includes picture windows, and that's for their A series and their E series.
Don't forget, Anderson does offer custom sizes as well. That information is linked in the Find My Size tool also. So visit andersenwindows.com/pros for all the product information you need to ensure you're ordering the right window, which is very important. There's actually not I just had this conversation with a guy who's been working with me, Justin, about early on in my career, how much anxiety was
Oh my
produced through the
gosh.
window ordering process where it's like, is it sized right? Is the rough opening the right size? And then just waiting for them to be like, I just waited this long for these windows to come in. Are they the right size? So this should help alleviate a lot of that anxiety. They're there to help you out.
And back then, the lead times were a lot shorter, and
Yes.
imagine being new now
Yeah.
and not having a tool like Find My Size.
Yeah. Not fun.
Not fun.
But yeah, check them out on their website, andersenwindows.com/pros.
Tyler, how many leads does your business bring in every month?
Actually, a better question would be how many leads does your bring what? How many quality leads does your business bring in every month? I better do that again.
No, just keep rolling with it, because if that number that comes to mind is lower than you'd like it to be, well, there's an easy solution.
Buildertrend CRM software simplifies the sales process and boosts close rates well above the industry average, with some users seeing 28 to 36 new construction leads per month.
Dang, that's a lot.
I would say so. It's more than I would actually
That's
need, to be
that's more than
honest.
that's more than one a day.
Yeah. So it's one place to create, capture, and close high quality prospects so you can hit your sales goals and grow your business.
Listen, if you want to see Buildertrend's lead management tools in action and learn how they can help you attract better leads and win more jobs, go to buildertrend.com/MC demo. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I was
Yeah.
just telling Tyler it's also pretty hot here and lots of rain and makes it difficult to do any construction, but
Yeah, apparently
take it a day at a time.
yesterday like literally everyone in my company was like, it's been so humid this year.
Dude, it's been so gross.
I
It's so bad.
I don't know, do I just not recognize that?
You're not out, you're not working, you know?
Here we go again.
That's the
You don't
difference.
work. Oh,
That's
Yeah.
the big difference
and
there.
we're over. We're done. We're done.
No, dude, it's been I don't know about up near you, Nick, but it didn't rain for about 4 or 5 weeks here,
Mhm.
and then when it started raining, we had rain, and then we pretty much have had thunderstorms and humidity for the past, like, 3, 4 weeks,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's just like I
Same.
feel like we're in Florida. Like, you
Yeah.
get rain every single day in the afternoon, and then it's just, like, damp. So I was looking up a little bit about you. You come from an accounting background?
Ha, yeah.
I
It's a
love how
little
you
over a
laugh.
decade ago. I
Yeah, but, like, you're not that young that like, you were before you got into building and everything else, you were fairly well established, then you had, like, a career change, right?
Yeah, completely. I made it a whole year and 3 months at KPMG and was miserable the entire time and trying to figure out what I was going to do.
Yeah,
Uh
that's an accounting firm?
yeah, it was an accounting firm, a big accounting firm in Houston.
Sounds
Um
like it could be a radio station too.
yeah.
Welcome back to KPNM.
KPMG.
Oh, KPMG. Where did I get M?
I don't know.
God.
KPMG. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
KPMG.
No, I'm
Um,
really glad that I was so miserable because, like, not only did I hate the job, but I was also working 80-hour weeks, so I
Mm.
couldn't have a life outside of it. And I'm really thankful for that because otherwise I might have stuck with it longer, if I had only just not liked the job, but I was working 40, 50-hour weeks, making decent money. But I was like, I don't care. I don't care if I don't make any money. I don't
Dude,
care
but
if I
there
didn't.
I saw
I
a
just,
recent study, like an article about that where it's like a lot that's the worst that's the worst possible outcome is that it doesn't suck enough.
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
'Cause you
hadn't
get
heard that, but yeah,
like,
absolutely.
if it doesn't suck enough, people end up staying in this, like, state
Yep.
of just unhappiness, where it's like
Yeah.
it has to suck really bad for someone to walk away.
Yep.
Um, I think I mean, I think that's gonna be that's what I wanna dig into the most is the career change and like Tyler said, like, being established and making such a big change. Because Tyler, I'm sure, gets messages as well as I, where it's I get messages saying, "Hey, I wanna come work for you." I'm currently in finance. I'm currently in, medical sales. I make this much money. How do I come work for you and maintain my salary? And I'm like, I have
Yeah, that
no
didn't
idea.
work.
I have no idea. That's very hard. It's, you're asking for a salary of someone that's a lead carpenter or,
Yep.
or well-established project manager. And so talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was what you're talking about is I get a lot of calls about that too. Hey, can we come work for you? Love what you guys do. Heard your story. But yeah, so how I did it is I went and was willing to make $12 an hour for several years. But
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 before
but
I did that,
how?
but how I found a guy that would take me on that would teach me.
Uh,
I actually
I mean financially. Like
oh
if you go
financially
from making, let's just say you're making $40 an hour and were you did you prepare yourself to take a pay cut down to $12 an hour?
no. So the first thing I did while I was working, making a good salary, I before the building thing happened, I was trying to figure out what to do, and so I was googling things like cool jobs. I ended up in the Peace Corps for 2 years. So I ended up in Uganda, where you make like negative money essentially. Like I think they pay you like $3,000 a year, but there you can like eat and stuff. So when I got back to the States in 2015, after 2 years of doing that, I had very little money. I think I had a little bit of savings, maybe $15,000 left to savings or something like that. Got married and I moved out in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma to learn from a guy. And that's where I was making 12 bucks an hour. And the way you do it is you drastically reduce your lifestyle. But I just come back from the Peace Corps. We didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have hot water.
Mm.
So we rented this little $400 a month house, like crappy house in this tiny little town in Oklahoma. And we were happy because we had a fridge, and we had a little AC unit, even though it sucked. And we ate every meal in our bed because the AC unit didn't get to the tiny little living room over there. Now looking back, I'm going, oh my gosh, how did I live in that? But at the time, it was, we did what we had to do. But that's the thing. Most people aren't actually motivated enough. They're like, I want to change,
Right.
but they're not really willing to do what it takes. So I'm in my late 20s making $12 an hour, working really hard,
Mm.
very different from what I had before. And was it fun? Absolutely not. Would I do it again? Yeah, to get where I am, 100%, 1,000 times over.
Mhm.
And that's what I run into with people is they're really not willing. They just want it to be easy.
How did you end up in the Peace Corps? I know you said you Googled cool jobs,
Yeah.
but that can't be the whole story.
I'm actually not even totally. I'm actually serious because it's so funny because
So
so many
Peace Corps
people.
is like paying Google ads to put that at like the top, like
I can't
coolest job
remember.
in the world.
Maybe so. They should because it's funny. I was just talking to another returned Peace Corps volunteer the other day, and he was a guy. He was in Bangladesh uh, before I did it, but he was talking about how all the girls in his group, all the women in his group, they had been the vast majority of them had been thinking about the Peace Corps their entire lives, had been
Mm.
planning on it. Same in my group, but all the guys were like, just showed up. Were like, hey, this seems pretty cool. And I know that's a stereotype, but that's what was my experience too.
Sure.
But it wasn't just looking for something cool for me; it was looking for meaning. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
when you're doing something, what felt like, and it's not that accounting's bad. I think accounting's amazing. I'm just not built for it. Like
Mhm.
people need to be in accounting. It's a great profession. Not for me. But I was looking for like meaning, and so the Peace Corps, and what you're doing, and going overseas and teaching and things like that. I was like, okay, maybe I can get into that. Um, I quickly found out I also, in the long run, didn't want to do that because it's when you get in the big nonprofit world, it's kind of like big corporation all over again, just with a 501c3 in front of it or behind it.
Mhm.
Um, and there's good people and there's not great people and everyone in between. And I really wanted to be able to control my own destiny a lot more than that. And I had started reading about building and urbanism and was introduced to new urbanism back in 2013 and read Suburban Nation by Andres Dewani, and so that really got my mind going towards the building.
And was that prior to going into the Peace Corps, or like?
Just before, like literally just before, I'm kind of skipping some of my story because I ended up in Panama right before the Peace Corps. Because when you apply for the Peace Corps, it was at the time a year-long application process, and so I was like halfway through, and finally I was like, I just got to get out of here.
A
So I quit.
year-long application process?
At the
I
time, it
guess that's
was.
what happens when it's the coolest job in the world.
And well, and it's government, doing all this stuff, so it just is slow and
Takes forever.
but But I ended up meeting my wife in the Peace Corps, though. So she was the first person I met at the airport, getting off the plane, and we got placed in the same small little town, and now we're married.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So you discovered this like urbanism movement prior to going into the Peace Corps, and then
Yep.
were you not feeling fulfilled in the Peace Corps to the point where you were like just looking into this, or was this just always on the back burner, something that interested you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I really spent a couple years just diving. I mean, I did a lot of stuff with the Peace Corps, and I was trying to think like, do I want to be in the UN or the Foreign Service or something like that? And realizing like, wow, I don't want to be part of that world. And at the same time, I was reading a lot about urbanism and traditional building and things like that. And then that combined with being able to, control my own destiny and be self-employed and stuff was really compelling.
Yeah.
And then I had met a guy that you guys have had on
Clay.
this
Yeah.
podcast, Clay. So in 2013, when I was in Panama, right before the Peace Corps, I was in Panama. We were in this little internship building a sustainable town in the jungle. It never really got built, but I was there for a few months. Clay happened to go down on a consulting gig, and I remembered who he was when I got back, and I'd followed him for those 2 years. When I got back, I called him up and said, "Hey, can I come work for you?" He was kind of like, "I guess, like you can come out for a week and see what it's like." So I went out and dug a giant my first week, and I was just fresh out of the Peace Corps. I hadn't been working out or anything, you know what I mean? Very different kind of life. And their first week, we were digging a foundation for a chimney, a full masonry chimney, and he wanted to go down to bedrock, and we were doing it by hand. So we dug like an 8-foot hole, like 5 feet wide by 3 feet or 4 feet or something by hand, and it was the sorest I've been. And I played football in like in high school and stuff. And this is the sorest I'd been in my life.
Where were you living prior to Oklahoma? Like, where did you grow up?
Houston, but
Oh,
I
okay.
moved around a bit. I went to college in Alabama, and then I was off in Houston again, then Panama, and then Uganda, then Oklahoma. So no connection to Oklahoma until Clay. He had just moved out to Carlton Landing.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
what we spoke about when we had him on. What like had you just never experienced or heard about this urbanism movement prior to this? Like, was this nothing that you experienced or learned about in school that interested you growing up? Was it just all of a sudden you heard about this and just you found meaning in what you were supposed to do through that?
Yeah, exactly. Like I grew up having no idea
Uh-oh.
what I wanted to do. I grew up in the suburbs of Houston, and when I read this, well, I traveled too before I when I graduated college. I just had this internship at KPMG where I made a bunch of money for my age, and then I had a job lined up in October. And so, like, I had a 3 month gap with money and a lined up job. So I went and backpacked Spain by myself for 3 months and was really inspired by that. And then it was post KPMG that I wasn't able to put all the pieces together, but it was after that that I read that book and it all started clicking and making sense. And that was the first time I'd say I was truly inspired. Like, I want to do something about this. Now, I don't know how to get into it. Do I go back to school and become a developer, right? Or do I go back to
Mm.
school and become an architect, or do I go become a tradesman, or what do I do? What's my access point into it? But I decided that I really wanted to learn. What Clay was doing was remarkable, and I had seen a lot of new urbanist stuff, and well, the new urbanists are doing amazing work and have pushed the ball forward in so many ways. I call like urbanism the recipe, and buildings are the ingredients. And you need both to have a good meal. If you have the best recipe in the world but kind of crappy ingredients, it's going to be a mediocre meal. And what I had noticed, seeing the juxtaposition of architecture in the United States versus architecture throughout the rest of the world in Italy and Spain. And we're building things that end up in a landfill in
Yeah.
75 years. They're building things that last centuries. They're
Yeah.
building things that, we're walking through the most beautiful places on earth that are 600 years old, that people spend billions of dollars to go to every year. And I'm looking around the United States going, what in the hell? And so
Yeah.
I really wanted to be a developer because I am business minded, but I don't just want to be a developer and go build this crappy stuff. So I'm going to learn how to build, and then design, and then develop. So we're just now kind of branching into development, but I've been running a design build firm for 6+ years now, on
So
top of working for Clay.
when you get involved and you're like, I want to push this new urbanism and this movement, other than small individuals like yourself or like Clay, like who's at the forefront of that movement? Is there like a massive network that you can tap into to look for guidance in this, or is it just individual people throughout the country and throughout the world that are pushing this movement?
There's a well established organization for over 30 something years, the CNU Congress of the New Urbanism. They have an annual get together, and I think I went to their one of their conferences like in 2017 or something like that in Savannah. So I've kept up with them. I don't keep up with them. I'm not like super involved,
Yeah.
but all the principles and values are there, and then I interact with a lot of people over time that are part of that group. But like, I didn't go to the most recent one that was in, I forgot where it was, Raleigh, I think. Charlotte. Sorry, it was in Charlotte just a month ago. But I was just too busy and didn't get to make it. But,
Yeah.
you know,
So
but there's really no one in the world of what we're doing building. Like, that's with the masonry and the structural masonry and mass wall masonry. I mean, Clay and I, and then there was another apprentice that Clay had. We're the only ones doing it that I know of. And now there's other people doing similar things, right, with concrete block and ICFs and other kind of like mass wall systems, Adobe, rammed earth, etc. But the triple wide wall system, these masonry walls, building new, that's extremely rare in the U.S.
So
But
other than you like seeing these type of structures that are sustainable and lasting forever, like what inspired you to say, "Hey, I'm going to completely uproot my life, change my life, turn it on its head, and I'm going to be one of two people in the country who are really pushing this type of building," because that seems slightly psychotic.
No, that's a great way to say it. And it actually has been, because the past, I would say, 8 years of my life have been the hardest of my life
Yeah, but probably the most rewarding.
and the most rewarding, without a doubt. And I was just talking to someone about this, and it sounds kind of funny because I'm kind of talking about childhood years or stuff. But I thought about what always got me going as a kid, and it was always this idea of an adventure. Whether it's exploring something, even TV shows, of always like. Whether it's Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, growing up it was Scooby Doo, like mystery stuff. And I know that sounds funny, but I mean, what drove me as a kid was this idea of exploration and adventure and trying something and inventing something and doing something, pursuing something. And so that's really, I was looking for meaning and some kind of purpose in an adventure. And that's what I found in this. It was being able to attach to what the new urbanists were talking about and saying, okay, not only am I interested in this, I think what they're doing is good. And I think I can have something to contribute here. And then I can also put together pieces that other people haven't put together yet. And so that's really what drove me to do this. And I mean, I absolutely love what I do now. Like, I will never retire. Like, that's an insane idea to me. I want to do more things that I like and less. I mean, because when you're running a business, I still 80% of my time is doing stupid stuff. Insurance and accounting and taxes.
I was
and
gonna say, like
it's just
accounting.
So, yeah, didn't get out of accounting, but at least it's for myself now. But yeah, we're able to do some really cool stuff now, and we're about to step into a development project, the first of this scale that I've seen, and certainly that I've done. But because I've done a pocket neighborhood, and we've done some single family detached houses on the the higher end. We've done a couple commercial buildings and towers and things like that. But we've got a little over an acre, and it's technically in Edmond, but we'll just call it Oklahoma City, in the downtown area. And we're putting like 30 townhouses and some
In an
commercial buildings.
acre.
Yeah.
That's
And
crazy.
so it's like, and it's really cool. I mean, it's so cool. Once you're inside it, you could be anywhere. It could feel like you're in the middle of Italy or
So
Spain or something like
you're
that.
essentially like building townhouses around it and having this center community in the middle.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of like patchwork of courtyards. I mean, it's going to be incredible. I'm so excited about it. It's kind of like the manifestation of like all the stuff I've been working on for a decade now.
So are you still involved with Clay?
We don't talk very often now. He's still in Carlton Landing. So I wouldn't say directly involved. No.
A couple minutes ago, you had said you've been for the last 6 years, including your time with Clay, and I wasn't sure if that was still
Oh yeah,
current
that
or
was
not.
8 years with Clay.
Got it.
So yeah.
So you guys aren't competing at this point.
No, and I think he never thought about it like that. His whole inspiration of taking on an apprentice is, hey, the agreement was it's going to be 2 years,
Mhm.
and you need to go off and do this on your own after. And
That's
so
cool.
that was the inspiration. And so
Sure.
actually, I stayed in Carlton Landing and built next to him for a bit. And that wasn't. I asked him, and he said, "No, that's a good idea because that way you're in kind of a safe place while you're getting your feet under you." So I was really thankful for the opportunity to be able to do that. And then we picked up and moved to Oklahoma City 3.5 years ago. Basically, April 2020, when we had a baby and COVID hit, and I'm starting my business over from scratch, and it was absolutely brutal and nearly
Oh,
put me under.
sure. Well, to ask the question I think I asked Clay, like, why aren't more people building triple white brick,
It's
mass wall?
hard.
Well,
It's hard.
let's take it back. Like, why do for people who haven't listened to that podcast, who are not familiar with your building methods, give an overview of what you are doing.
How bad is this sound right now? I've got my lawn
The
guys right
landscapers
outside, of
outside.
course.
It's fine.
Okay. So yeah, great question. A lot of times we refer to it as pre-war building because if any of you listeners, if you think about wherever your downtown area is and you go into an old coffee shop or bar or something like that and you're seeing exposed brick walls inside, it's probably a type of structural masonry or mass wall masonry. And what I mean by that is most masonry today, the vast majority of masonry today, is what we would call a veneer, where you've just got some kind of substructure, whether it's steel or 2x4s or 2x6s, and then you've got a single layer of brick on the exterior. Now and it's really just a cladding. It's taking the place of a hardy or
Mhm.
wood siding. Now it's a quality siding, right? It's going to last, but your structure, the wood structure, is actually holding up the masonry. Versus what we call structural masonry, it's thick enough that the masonry becomes self-stabilizing and self-supporting. So there is no substructure. The masonry is the structure. So triple white refers to 3 brick thick. And actually, this is interesting. I mean, it's nothing to celebrate, but like I've seen pictures of some of these buildings in Ukraine that you can see the wall section because they've been blown up, and you see that they're triple
Mhm.
white walls. And so what we say is the oldest building methodology in the world is some form of structural masonry or mass wall masonry, whether that's the pyramids or the Pantheon or the Parthenon or the Biltmore or whatever it is in the United States. But we stopped building that way early in the 19th century with the advent of lumber mills and mass-produced nails. And what I would say is, stick framing was a brilliant invention. It reduced the cost and increased the speed and really allowed us to use our industrial capacity to build quickly. But the problem, in my opinion, is not that we still build with stick frame. It's that the only thing we build is with stick frame, because historically, all the cities, say in Europe, well, those little buildings started off as shacks, wood shacks kind of cobbled together next to each other in their city centers. But during the Renaissance, when they were really at the peak of their wealth and technology, they rebuilt out of masonry. When London burned down, they rebuilt out of masonry. When Chicago burned down, they built out of masonry, because when you want to build something that lasts, you build out of masonry. But what we did in the United States is, as we became the wealthiest country in the history of the entire world, rather than build better, we just started building bigger and packing more luxury finishes inside. We went from 1,500 square feet average house size 50 years ago to 2,500 square feet. I'm not saying no one should own a 2,500 square foot house. I'm just saying when that's the average, that's pretty dang big. And so people say, well, isn't masonry more expensive? Yes, it is. But it's not because masonry is so expensive. It's because stick framing is actually very cheap. Although a truly well detailed stick frame house, your Christine Williamson's, the Building Science Fight Club, or Matt Riesinger's, or those are very expensive to build still when you're actually building something that can last multi-centuries.
Mhm.
And of course, and this drives me crazy because so much of the drive of the building industry right now is all about sustainability, and that really just gets captured in this idea of energy efficiency and R value. And I'm saying, if you want to be sustainable, build things that last 500 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, so
It's true, and you're looking at it from a renewable resource or just the resources that it takes to build a home, where it's like or the R value of the walls or how airtight they are, and it's like, but you're still having to renovate and rebuild those envelopes a couple times in the life cycle of a house versus something that's all masonry and it's like essentially one and done.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but what so aside like to me it does seem that like the biggest hurdle that you have is that the cost of building houses with these methods it's so much more than stick building, and like you said, it's not because it's expensive, it's because stick building is relatively inexpensive compared to it. So like what type of an impact do you feel that you can have or we can have, and this is not that much different than what we're trying to do, where it's like there's so much ego in our country right now and in the building industry right now that bigger is better, and it's like, well, why would we build a 1,500 square foot house with your methodology than we could afford a 4,000 square foot house? Like that's a really tough fight
Yep.
for the general public or for society in our country?
And that okay, so that's a great question. And people always ask, well, how much more does it cost? And of course, that is a very difficult question to answer because I would love to just give everyone a straight answer.
Right.
Here's the simplest way to put it though. If you're already in kind of the higher end construction, and I don't mean like super high end, like, ridiculous custom houses. I just mean higher end construction, which would be in some of these new urbanist neighborhoods. Or I don't know an example where you guys are necessarily, but here, if you're in a nice neighborhood building houses, these masonry houses are going to be 20 to 30% more. So that's a lot more, but it's not a crazy amount more. And because we design everything in house too, like I taught myself design while I was working for Clay, and so we're a true design build. And the reason I bring that up is everything is so thoughtful that usually people walk into our houses and think it's a good bit bigger than it is. Now they don't think it's twice the size that it actually is, right? But if it's a 2,000 square foot house, they're like, "Oh, I really thought this was like 2,400 square feet,"
Mm.
because we're making use of every little space. Um, and that idea too of and some of this is figuring out how to shape the narrative with people, because you can actually make, I guess you could say, like luxury accessible if you put it in a smaller footprint. And I say luxury, I don't really like the word luxury. I use it more as kind of a, from a client perspective, because everything is luxury at this point. You know what I mean? You drive
Yeah.
by some crappy suburb and neighborhood with, Pinewood Creek, and there's no pines and there's no creek and there's no luxury estates either. Um, but when it comes to cheaper building, right, then we're way more expensive because the cost of the brick is the same as it would be on the expensive house. But then the finishes inside are much less if you're using vinyl floors or vinyl windows or whatever it is. Well, then your masonry proportionally becomes much higher. So it could be double the cost or something like that. And so the context of where I think this is very applicable is, no, it's not to build all the country's single family detached houses in suburban neighborhoods, but it is to build attached and townhouses in downtown areas, because one, you solve flooding issues, you solve fire issues, you solve sound issues with the masonry, right? You're not worried about fire and stuff like that in the same way. Whenever you're building attached, you just have the shared party wall and you don't have windows inside, and those windows are very expensive just masonry wise, all these openings. So that's what we're doing in this project, where it actually makes I'm not saying it's not expensive, but it makes the masonry more accessible. And of course, when you're building in rectangles, people don't think about this, but if you the larger the rectangle it is, the more cost effective it is. Because if you've got, I know no one's going to build a 10-foot by 100-foot building, but say someone is building a 10-foot by 100-foot building, that's 1,000 square feet. If you just make it 1 foot wider, 11 feet, by 100 feet, you've added 100 square feet by just adding 1 foot of wall, or 2 feet of wall if you think about both sides.
Mhm.
And so there's a power in scale, you could say, on larger commercial buildings. But we're just now getting to explore that, because another reason it's so expensive is we've been innovating on stick framing for almost 200 years now. All of the industry and vendors and subs and contractors and inspectors and banks and everything is focused on that. I'm having to order stuff from out of Canada and the UK and Ohio and brick over here just to be able to build a house. Over time, we want to vertically integrate more, and get some powers of scale out of that. And I think it'll bring the cost down, but it's not just about bringing the cost down. It's actually educating people about what are you paying for? What are you buying?
Mhm.
And things like that.
Well, I think, I mean, this is what attracts me to like CLT buildings and even concrete buildings, where we're doing a CLT project right now. It's in design, and the first thing that comes up is like, well, what's the cost difference than traditionally framed? I'm like,
Yep.
that's it's not a apples to apples comparison, because we're talking about leaving the CLT exposed on the inside.
Yep.
So a CLT wall system is effectively replacing my framing, my insulation, my drywall, my my paint, and my
Yep.
trim, and all my interior trim. It's like, so if I package all those up and then say, here's my CLT cost, it there's a fair chance that it might be less expensive to build CLT. But if I'm
Yep.
building a CLT wall and I'm then adding, drywall and plaster on the inside and painting it and adding trim, it's like, okay, well, now we're not. And it's
Yep.
similar to like the masonry walls, where a lot of your homes I've seen on your website, you have exposed masonry on the inside.
Yep.
If I said, "Hey, I want all that strapped and plastered and painted," it's an enormous cost, and it's almost one of those things where it's like it's wasteful,
Yep.
where it's like you're actually covering up the part, like a huge part of the beauty of these homes.
And that's the thing. It's, when you create something that's beautiful, that is compelling in and of itself. And that's what I love about masonry. Like a brick is the size it is to fit the human hand. And then when you've got this house that's been sculpted out of 60,000, 100,000 brick, laid, each one laid by hand, you get a story out of the walls.
Right.
They feel human. Um, and I'm a big fan of drywall, by the way. We on our partition walls inside, because we build our envelope walls out of masonry. When I say envelope, I mean essentially all your exterior walls
Sure.
out of masonry, and then anything inside for dividing off rooms and things like that, we do out of 2x4s or 2x6s in drywall. And people sometimes ask me why don't you do all masonry inside? And it's like, well, masonry would be more expensive for one, but that's actually not the main reason. It's if you want to build something to last for centuries, you want the shell, you want the envelope to be durable for centuries, but then you want the interior to be adaptable for
Mhm.
centuries. And so 2x4s and drywall is an amazing material. It's fast. It does what it's supposed to do well when it's
Mhm.
used in the right context. So it's not about just for us about going to this old way of building. It's how do we blend the best of old and new? Um,
And
because
sorry, finish your thought. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
there it goes. Can you go again?
Yeah, I was just gonna say finish your thought. I interrupted you some.
Oh no, go ahead.
So that was the question that I had, and I've been holding on to for a little bit, is with respect to your methods are very traditional for building the envelope of the house, but like how closely are you building to methods that were used a couple hundred years ago? Like as far as the way you're tying in windows, obviously a couple hundred years ago they didn't have electrical, so electrical and utilities and exterior walls, like how much are you borrowing from traditional methods and how much are you having to integrate new?
That's a good question. Boy, we're always innovating. Like every build, we're trying something new. And I will definitely say I've gotten better at this, figuring out little tips and tricks. And I used to have lots of conduit on walls,
Yeah.
if you're running. Now, granted, you've got partition walls inside where you can put a lot of things, but on the downstairs, you're in a pretty small house. It's mainly just brick walls. And so we'd have conduit. But now with all these wireless switches,
Mm.
we put floor plugs in to take care of that. So then the walls don't get, full of conduit, and then we can put our little pico switches, wireless switches everywhere, and you get this really clean look. And now we're putting, if we got a TV, going on a brick wall, we'll run during the masonry, we'll just have the masons run a little Smurf tube that the electrician can feed through later. And so it's really about thinking ahead. And that's why I'm saying we've gotten better at it. But there's all sorts of things because now that we're insulating things too, but you have to be careful when you're insulating a mass wall building, because a mass wall building really works quite differently than a conventional stick frame building. And that, I mean, brick it's a porous material. If you drop it in water and take it out, it's going to weigh more than when it was before you dropped it in, because it's going to have absorbed water. When you've got your entire wall system out of a foot thick of brick or more, your wall system is really, it's shedding a lot of water when it's raining really hard. The vast majority of water gets shed, but that masonry is still absorbing water and distributing it throughout the wall system, and then it's breathing from both sides, you could say, like vapor,
Mhm.
water vapor is moving in and out. And the mistake a lot of people make is they'll paint a brick building with a latex or oil-based paint, and then that traps moisture, because water will get in the building and then it can't get out, and that's where you get problems. But that's why if we're painting buildings, we use lime wash or potassium silicate, because it's got a high perm rating and is breathable.
What?
So we're innovating all the time, but we're also looking back all the time. And I'm always looking, like I'm going to a structural masonry workshop in Spain actually later this year. All these Italian professors that are talking about vaulting and flying buttresses and things that I'm so excited about, because we've completely forgotten how to do these things.
I love how excited you are about this stuff. Like it's refreshing. I want to ask a question, like from a building science perspective, because you just touched on painting brick, and there's always like the great debate about that. And you just rattled off some materials that can achieve similar look, which is great. What about the other side, the interior of the wall? And for a lot of people that are listening, myself included, I live in Boston. There's brownstones everywhere, and my we oftentimes will renovate a brownstone, and someone will say, "Hey, just spray foam the backside of the brick." I'm
Mm-hmm.
always I'm an advocate not for you like to not use spray foam. We typically advise against it for a number of reasons. The primary reason being we've seen it fail too many times, and it's just we'd rather use something else. Typically, we're using like a mineral bat up against the brick. Now, the argument comes where we're talking about air sealing, and we've used products from Proseco that have
Mm-hmm.
basically get painted on the back on the inside wall of the brick. It's vapor open, but it seals that wall up so we can be effectively airtight. So, what are your based on your knowledge of solid masonry walls, what are your thoughts on insulating the interior portion, or even sealing up the interior portion of a brick wall?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And this is something that I think is going to take more exploration and testing and learning.
Mm,
But we do the same thing. I recommend it against spray foam. We definitely don't put it against brick. We use rigid mineral wool of some kind. And for
mhm,
anyone listening, the reason we use mineral wool, as you guys know, but the reason we use it is because it's hydrophobic, so it doesn't absorb water. It's the opposite of a sponge that soaks up water. It can get wet, but the water kind of runs through it. It's also highly permeable, meaning water vapor can move in and out. And then also it's inorganic because it's made out of slag and
mhm,
rock, basalt rock, slag being an all kind of like a byproduct of metal making. So it's essentially metal and rock, meaning it can't mold. There's nothing inherent about it that can mold. And once again, masonry is a material that can carry water. So that's
mhm,
very important to us. So that's why we do use mineral wool. So sometimes we'll fur out the interior wall, just say with a 2x4, and put rigid mineral wool in between, and then drywall, and you could do a veneer plaster, or you could just paint it.
mhm,
Um, and then the other way we're doing is we'll split off, instead of doing a single triple wide wall, we'll do two double wide walls, rigid mineral wool in between, and then we're tying them together with what we're calling Teplo ties, which are these basalt reinforced ties that we get out of the UK. And they actually do like a veneer and a veneer, and because it's kind of like spreading your legs, because
mm,
these are like, if you're standing and someone's pushing you over and your legs are spread out farther, you're more stable. And since these are rigid ties, if you're pushing on one wall, it's really pushing on the other one. And it's basalt reinforced, so that way it's not metal, so that way it doesn't rust and doesn't
mm.
blow out the walls. And then also it's very low on thermal conductivity. So those are a couple of our two main methods. But one of the things I'm getting quite excited about is hempcrete. And, that's just really come online in the US because of our laws historically around cannabis and stuff. But hempcrete, which is just the hemp, and lime, the binder, which keeps it from molding and stuff. So people are using this for insulation. And I know the French, like I read this a while ago, but the French discovered it in some like 6th century bridge abutment, and they were using it to insulate their mass wall masonry walls. Because once again, just like you guys are saying, you should not spray foam the inside of it. And people learn this in historic preservation. You'll destroy a mass wall masonry building really quickly if you do stuff like that, particularly in cold environments like you guys.
Yeah. So and to I'm on board with that. What about air sealing though? Because I think historically we see these walls they're not airtight.
Right. Right. That's a good question. We do not put any coatings on the interior of our walls to try to air seal it. And I will just say I haven't had any issues there. Gosh, there's a lot of competing interests here with, the entire it's
Say it,
difficult.
say it,
Yeah.
say it.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
I'm with you. Say it.
I get so tired of everything being about energy efficiency. We're
Yeah.
willing to destroy the entire business of building and architecture so we can
Mhm.
squeak out a little more R value. And it's
Or
like,
the entire world of resources.
yes,
Mhm.
and we're willing to make our buildings unhealthy doing it. Like people don't know that air quality inside our homes is often 5 times worse than outdoor air quality in urban environments, and that's largely because of air sealing and
Mhm.
insulation. And yes, you can overcome it with things like ERVs, and I think that's going to be like by like code and within a decade because we don't realize how toxic our houses are. And so, if people are asking me, "Oh, what's the price?" People are just so, and I say people, I'm kind of talking about the industry, is just so hyper focused on this one thing when there's all these other things to consider, like durability and beauty and health of the people inside. And if I have to prioritize, I would rather have healthy people, beautiful buildings that are going to last and still efficient, but
Mhm.
I would be willing to lose a little efficiency, especially if over time we're coming up with cleaner energy options. Why is it all in the building to be energy efficient? Why is it not on people to live with the 10-degree temperature swings inside their own house? We just assume that everyone must live at a constant 70 degrees, 365 days a year, 24/7.
Mhm.
And so it's just, I don't know. I
What
find
a
it pretty
what
infuriating.
what a
Every
I
3 years, the code comes out and it just gets more strict, but no one's really thinking about this stuff, is what I get the sense.
And to kind of expand on what you just said, it's also like we're relying on the building to separate ourselves from what we're doing outside. Meaning,
Yep.
like, yeah, we're continuing to make the air quality terrible outside, but that's okay. We're building our houses to filter all that anyway. Where it's like, well, we wouldn't have to filter as much if we did a better job outside, right?
Yes. Right. A more holistic approach just
Yeah,
overall. Because you can build lead buildings all day in the middle of suburbia. And if you got to drive
sure.
45 minutes and even if it's a Tesla, like if you look at how the what's required to make these cars and these batteries, it is insane.
Well,
But like we all trick ourselves and think we're saving the world by driving electric cars.
it's the same thing that they put with all the emissions on the cars, like the diesel industry.
Oh my
Like
god.
diesel vehicles were so efficient.
Yep.
Like that's why people drove them. They did pollute more than other vehicles, but you consumed less natural, like raw natural resources.
Now I get
So now they
15
have
miles to the
all these
gallon.
filters in, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
like now you get no
DEF
no
fluid
fuel
and
economy, and but like you're not polluting as much, you're just consuming more natural resources, where it's like, I don't know, is that better at the end of the day? But it just comes down to like politics and
Yeah.
everything that people put in place. But it like to be so concerned about air tightness and how much energy your building is consuming, yet you have to remodel it every 10 to 15 years because products are outdated or they don't last or the batteries went wrong. Where it's like, hey, maybe our building isn't as airtight, but it can fucking stand here for 200 years and not have to get touched and be
mhm.
fine.
Yeah, and it's not going to become like a trap of mold and mildew and unhealthy chemicals that are in all your, like I totally agree.
Yeah, people are so hung up on it, and like that's the draw, and it like at what cost,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Where like there has to be a happy medium there. You're on one end of the spectrum, there's people on the other end of the spectrum, but like they're so hyper focused, like the makeup airs in kitchens
Yep.
without having ERVs and everything else. Like they put into this code that you have to have makeup air, and you're just pulling in unconditioned air into your house, where it's like maybe your house leaks enough that you don't need like it's not a blanket that you can wipe over the entire industry and cover it. People, it should be able to be taken case by case and house by house and make a judgment call that's best. I get what they're trying to do, but it would be even more frustrating if I were someone like you trying to build the way that you are and having these energy codes and regulations that are just making it harder for you to build. When at the end of the day, like the way that you're building is very sustainable and very environmentally conscientious, considering
Yep.
how long your buildings and the materials that you're using can last.
100%.
Maybe you don't have a great blower door test, but like, okay,
Yeah.
that there it has to be give and take, and I think
Mhm.
that people should realize that.
Yeah, it's like, and we use geothermal for all of our HVAC. And for people listening, I mean, geothermal is a really cool system where rather than having your how you heat and cool your house, where they're drilling, on say a 2,000 square foot house, we're drilling a couple wells about 400 feet deep because that deep down in the earth, it's a constant temperature of I think 72 degrees, and water transfers heat 25 times more efficiently than air. So what's happening is in the summertime, your heat pump's pulling out the heat in your home. It's taking it down 400 feet below the earth where it's, constant 72 degrees. It's cooling that water. It's storing the heat down there and cooling the water. And that comes up. And then it's doing the vice versa in wintertime. And those are very efficient. You couple that with some solar panels and stuff too. And you've got a really like
The
energy efficient house, you could say, in terms of energy consumption.
the issue that I've seen recently, and actually this came up in conversation yesterday about geothermal, is the cost.
Yep.
Is that, the drilling cost is substantial, and it's really hard for an end user to see the value in adding a sometimes six-figure number to their their system, where it's like, why would I do that? It's like, sure, it's more efficient, but I, I I would never get the return on it. And it's case by case, but that's been the biggest feedback that we've seen when we've explored it, is like the cost is they can't justify the cost. It's very hard to prove the math.
And that's
Um,
an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, it's got to make financial sense, which is another thing codes and things don't understand.
yeah.
But for whatever reason, I don't. It probably depends so dramatically on project and where you are, but because of the federal tax credits that are 30% right now
Hmm.
on geothermal and solar and things like that, I mean, we just quoted a house out that was a very budget conscious house. And so we weren't budgeting out some like super efficient conventional HVAC system, but after the tax credit, they were about the same.
Hmm.
So we just went geothermal.
The other thing, and backing up, I think one of the reasons some of these areas can be more competitive is because they're every. It's just the entire neighborhood
Not a
has it.
special, yeah.
It's not just like a one-stop shop. And I think, like Jason from Artisan, all of those homes in, Norton Commons, those are all geothermal.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
One of the
and
benefits of it is it doesn't have that outside condenser, so you don't have the noise.
total like, I see the benefit.
Yeah.
I forget who said it, but I feel like it was on this podcast, but there was discussion about, is there concern that if every house was on geothermal, are we gonna heat the core of the earth up? It's like,
Right.
because we're pumping all of this heat down into this 400-foot layer. We're laughing, but
I know. We don't
but it's
know.
like, I, I don't know. Like, if
Yeah.
there's a
Can't be
thousand,
much that can't be much worse than what we're doing right now.
yeah, I know. And but that's on the same mindset of like, hey, we have to create airtight. It's like, at what cost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's
And
like,
I'm,
sure,
yeah.
there's 30 townhouses in 1 acre that are gonna be on geothermal, heating up that core of the earth by a degree. It's like, is that okay?
Yeah.
And I think what's important to kind of call attention to is that all of this stuff is just this ever evolving, you know, slew of information, right? And we're all, I think especially nowadays, we're all trying to, understand the information and then implement it at, the best of our capabilities. You know,
Yep.
we build airtight homes. It's something that we're proud of. We think it's necessary. But after this conversation, I'm not going to not go build an airtight home. But I have
Right.
a different understanding of, oh, am I making the right decisions?
Yeah.
Now I could, just, and again, building an airtight home isn't the issue. It's the the use of abundant resources.
Yeah.
right? At the expense of trying to create an airtight home, where it's like, well, that isn't where I'm not prioritizing the right thing. I have to kind of organize my priorities. And if I end up with an airtight home, great.
Yeah.
And if we have, good air quality on the inside, great. But, it can't be just, the only thing you focus on is making sure that the home is airtight.
I agree, and I think health, like once again, I mean, I don't know how much you guys keep up with this, but like health statistics in the U.S., we are insanely unhealthy as a society, and it's becoming so much worse. Like each generation, I mean, I think our generation is the first one that's not going to live as long as our parents. And and I just want to bring up one small example of what I mean, because I wish building codes were actually to focus more
Hmm.
on the health aspect than this kind of like energy efficient obsession. Because here's a simple example, because sometimes people say, why don't we build great things anymore? And they'll say, well, because we don't have any good craftsmen anymore. Why don't we have any good craftsmen? And and I actually think it's actually we don't have good craftsmen because we don't build great stuff anymore. So
Hmm.
like, what's the motivation to be a craftsman if you're going and working on some crappy house? And as a society, and I've heard you talk about this, Tyler, like people just as a society aren't like treated with respect. People that are in the trades, why is it better to be an accountant than a carpenter?
Hmm.
When people look at you when you walk in the room or something, these people, used to be kind of held up with esteem for it, because this is really hard work. But what I'm going on about health is I learned this recently, but testosterone levels are dropping precipitously. And yeah,
Hmm.
I think I
Not
read it was
me.
like,
Not me.
and not everyone, right? You're going hard. But I think in young people, it could be
Speak for
like
yourself.
it could be like a third of what it was just 100 years ago amount of testosterone. And some people are like, well, great, people aren't fighting anymore, right? Or fewer babies, whatever. Well, no. One of the things testosterone does is it increases your pain threshold substantially. And not only
Hmm.
that, it helps you can manage cold and hot temperatures better. You can actually almost engage with pain in an enjoyable way, like in a workout where it kind of feels good to push hard. When you don't have enough testosterone, none of that happens. And when you think about what it takes to build, it's freaking hard work.
Yeah.
Whatever trade you're in, it's hard. And I mean, this is just within the trades, but I'm talking about an overall population. When 2,000 kids born after, or sorry, a third of kids born after 2000 are going to be diagnosed with diabetes. It's like, what is going on? And if our houses are that toxic and unhealthy, why aren't we obsessing over that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like there's so many aspects to that, right? And we're talking about building and healthy buildings, but it's the same. I look at the same way. I look at food the same way, where
Mm-hmm.
it's, my wife and and the kids traveled last year, and we were in Greece for a couple weeks, and we every night we would eat, and we were like, what? We feel great. Like and this is gonna sound weird, but it's like, you know we specifically remember talking about the fact that we didn't have like we didn't have deodorant for whatever reason, but we didn't smell. And
Yeah.
it's like the food is just like pure food. And it's like we remember coming home and being like, this, like the food just doesn't feel good. It doesn't
Yep.
feel as good. And it was the same thing when we were when I was in Switzerland with Siga. It's like the buildings are clean. The buildings are
Yep.
like, these buildings are from the 1600s, and they've been, they're solid masonry buildings, right? But they've also been maintained and adapted for modern day living.
Yep.
Yeah, the windows were upgraded to, tilt turns, but the envelope was the same. They weren't adding membranes and tapes and everything. It was a solid masonry wall, and the inside got modified from a office building to, a hotel or whatever it was.
Yep.
And it's just you talk about the US having like this health crisis, and I know very little about like the health crisis in terms of like statistics, but I know enough to know that we're not doing a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And but on the same token, we're all trying to understand what we're supposed to do.
Yep.
And oftentimes we're hyper focusing, i.e. the airtightness, like we're hyper focusing on one thing, thinking like, all right, let's just do this and we'll be okay, when the reality is it's no, it's everything.
Yep.
Like, you have to consider everything.
It's crazy to even think about, like, as you're talking and having this conversation about how many things that we probably make 2, 3 times more difficult than if we were just to do it the way that it was originally done. Like, even like, how hard is it to properly detail a home that's supposed to look like it's stone with a stone veneer versus just building an
Right.
actual house out of stone?
Ki
And, like, it's like the photo I sent you on Instagram the other day where it's like a very well-known architect in a very nice house, and it's supposed to look like it's stone, and then they have this, like, crazy cornice and gable trim detail, and it's like, that would never go on a stone house because
Yep.
back then you could not detail that trim to go around the stone would never be cut straight like that 200 years ago. And it's like you're going through all these efforts to try and make shit look real and then waterproof the substructure, make sure
Mhm.
there's a drainage plane there and that you're properly insulated, where it's like it might be less expensive to just build that out of masonry.
Yep.
There 2 points in that, we're building these beams in a home that we're building with that's designed by Steve Teague, and there's these massive timber. We're using solid hemlock for the trusses and the beams in the ceiling, and I keep talking about how we're using solid material so it looks authentic, so it checks and cracks, and over time it looks like a real beam. And I'm getting a ton of flack where it's like, but they're not real. And fair enough, like they're totally right. I didn't timber frame this house.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, but I also like it's an aesthetic detail. Just like the
Yep.
casing. Like I could use 1x4 casing, but we're not. We're using a more elaborate casing. Similar to that, Tyler, when th- uh, going back to the food reference, it's like ketchup is an example where it's like you look at the ingredients of ketchup here in the US and then compare it to like Greece, same
Yeah.
It's
manufacturer.
just like sugar.
It's like,
Yeah.
why can't we just why can't we just crush up tomatoes like they do in Greece and put it in a bottle? Instead, we have like 17 ingredients in it. It's like, isn't that harder? And it's like, well, it's more costly. It's like, I would pay more.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of people that would pay more. Look at Whole Foods.
Yeah.
Everyone pays more at Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Like we're going through all of this trouble to make it appear authentic,
And it's
myself
still,
included,
yeah.
and instead of just doing it the authentic way.
No, man, there's so many things y'all said there, but on the how difficult we make things. Here in Oklahoma City, I was watching this bank being built, and they were doing all these arches, and it was all out of this concrete, concrete arches, all this reinforced stuff, and then they come and like stick brick on both sides of it and the underside. I'm like, dude, and it's not even the interior; it's like a loggia. It's not even the interior,
Oh,
like where they're having to worry about insulation. It's I'm like, what are you doing? And I actually met a mason who's in sales now for brick, but he's probably in his 60s, and he said, man, when I was starting off, like I was laying brick just like you. We'd show up on a job site, there'd be a footing, we'd just start laying brick.
mm,
And I said, what happened? And he said, the steel industry. Now,
mm,
granted, this is one person, although this is the second time I've heard this. The lobbying from the steel industry is one of the things that really push things this way. I've heard the same thing about lime because everything is Portland based in the US, whether it's our
mhm,
concrete or our mortar and stuff. It's all Portland based, and they'll put a little lime in it for workability. But in Europe, it's all lime based, and
mhm,
they're using a different kind of pozzolan than Portland because Portland can have all sorts of issues. Why? Lobbying. When you
mm,
talk about ketchup having a bunch of sugar here, lobbying. And now I'm
yeah.
not saying I know all this for a fact because it's really hard to know these things, but I'm becoming increasingly skeptical of all this
No,
kind
but
of stuff.
no, but
Because
you're
like, what's
right.
going on?
And you look at, I mean, look at commercial construction here in Boston. The most common construction you see is a concrete core with a steel structure, and then you go down to DC and it's all concrete. It's like,
Yep.
why don't we build all concrete buildings? It's like, oh, well, the steel guys would have an issue with that. So they lobby for a hybrid.
Yeah.
It's like,
And that
that,
stuff is what's
that's,
making it into the codes,
yeah, that's, so it's being like that. To your point, Tyler, a couple minutes ago, it's like, so it's government. It's,
Dude, so they
we're,
they built, I'm pretty sure it was a Comcast building in Philly, which was like a huge high rise, and they opted to put waterless urinals in. and the plumbing union was so up in arms about it that they were gonna lose this, like, big contract for all the drain lines and the water supplies, that they made an agreement to rough them all in as if they were standard
No,
urinals and then just run waterless, where it's like
that's insane.
it's the same thing. It's like, how are you're not saving the environment anymore by putting waterless in at that point. Like, you still ran all the copper, all the plastic or galvanized drain lines where it's like, what are you doing? Like
Mm.
that why even use waterless urinals at that point? You're not helping anyone. And
Yeah, no, that's so infuriating. And
but
see, this is like for me, like so much. Well, I mean, there's this aspect what you're talking about, which is kind of different because we're really just talking about money and things like that. But I don't know. You have all these special interest groups, and then climate change is just the
Mm.
all meaning or something. You just all you have to say is climate change, and you can do whatever you want. Um, and and that it's like we've lost the why behind why we build. We
Yeah.
build in the purpose of architecture is to facilitate human flourishing, and you could have a whole conversation about what human flourishing is, which probably not for this conversation here, but that's the why. We don't build in order to build something energy efficient. Like that doesn't make any sense. I can tell you how to build something energy efficient. Don't put any windows in it.
Right.
Like so people are pretending that's what they care about, but really it's a balance of all sorts of things where human comfort is really important, beauty is really important, all these other health is really important. Um, and then there's environmental issues that concern me a lot more than climate change. I'm not saying climate change doesn't concern me. I'm just saying there's more immediate things than climate change. When there's places in, I don't know, I think it's in Nevada that don't have water. We're running out of natural water, our power grids, our infrastructure. I mean, there's so many issues we have. All the contaminated rivers and
Mm.
glyphosate that we spray on everything and our food systems and the soil depletion. Like there's a lot to worry about. And I know that sounds like I'm being pessimistic. I'm actually quite optimistic because I think things have gotten so like institutionalized and bureaucratized that they're becoming increasingly inefficient. And I almost think a lot of them need to break so that something new can be built, like build off a new foundation.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, essentially it's like you becoming an accountant.
it gets, yeah, it has to get so bad that people are like, you know what, I'm done. Like it just doesn't make any sense more. We got to figure something new out. So I'm kind of hoping that's what's happening. And I think there's a nice like sub counterculture happening across all sorts of industries, but
Mm.
including the building industry, whether it's you guys or us or other, urbanists out there, architects, builders, craftsmen, where they're kind of like fed up with the system that is, and they're trying to carve out their own little path. And I don't know. I'm excited about seeing that critical mass, over time. But I still wonder, like, how can everyone? I don't know. How can we take a more holistic approach to all of this kind of stuff?
Yeah. Um, I have a question. I'm curious if you like when you're building a solid masonry wall, um, or a home, right? Most of that heat loss is going to be around your penetrations and then through your roof. So, like, how much less efficient would a solid masonry wall be than like a standard 2x6 wall with fiberglass insulation? Like, I can't imagine it would be that much
It's
less
probably not
efficient
that much. It's probably not that much less. I would say in a really cold environment, it probably would be less
just
efficient.
because of thermal mass.
Yeah, the thermal mass when you're in really cold settings, it just doesn't help you that much. But even in Oklahoma, it works pretty decently, and especially in New Mexico or Arizona or something. But down in the South, I'd say climate zone 3 and below, the mass wall stuff, even uninsulated, I think is actually like it's not bad. Um,
Yeah. I mean, because like my house is 150 years old, and they framed it with balloon walls and then put brick nogging in all the
oh,
walls. So they
that's
like they set brick in between all of the balloon frame walls, and there's just a structural sheathing on the outside. And my understanding is it's thermal mass, but then also that's like their air blockage.
yep,
Because the old clapboard was essentially just put on those balloon framed walls, and that was it, with
yep.
like a paper over it. And I just like, I know that most of your heat loss, even in that system, it's around the window openings where the windows have been replaced and the mortars dropped out, and like nobody ever pulled all the old casings from the inside or the out and re insulated them. But I'm not like losing heat and air conditioning through the middle of my wall that has brick nogging, right? Like, yeah, maybe there's thermal mass when it's cold in the winter that my house, the walls feel cold, but it's issues that are unrelated to the insulation or lack of insulation in my walls that I feel would have a bigger impact on the energy efficiency of my home. Um,
Totally.
where I would imagine, like, building new, it would have to be the same thing. Like, if you were building and put no insulation in your masonry walls, even in a colder climate, and you detailed your roof insulation well and your penetrations as far as windows and doors go, that it would be a relatively efficient home.
Yeah, if it were up to me, I would be totally fine just building those. Well, when I say uninsulated, the roof insulated, like you're saying, and leaving the
Yeah.
walls uninsulated, just because it does perform okay, and I think it hits so many other marks. It's I think it's but because of increasing codes, we're having to insulate.
Yeah. My buddy around the corner that I did some work for, he owns a house that's like part of the house is pre-Revolutionary War, and he put a new door in
Wow.
at some point, and like he put the door in, and it was just the door and the framing in the opening of the house for a few years, because I think the wall section was like 2.5 feet wide, and he's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with the jam like through the outside of this house. But it's crazy, like, they would build houses back then, and they would just dig the foundation for the house and then find all the stones around the property to build the house from. They weren't, like, going elsewhere to find stones. They basically dug up farm fields and, like, would find rock and stone to build the foundation and the homes around them, and then mortar in between them. And we've gotten so far away from that. But it's the same thing with his house. Like, his house is 2.5 foot thick masonry walls, and like you're not putting insulation in there, and like
Yeah.
once it's heated, it maintains temperature fairly well.
Yep. And
um
and one of the things that people don't think about, it's actually I remember Clay saying this. Um, Sometimes he'd come downstairs in his house where it was a little colder in the wintertime, and his little kid would come cuddle up with him on the couch, like next to their little fireplace that was heating everything up. Like, we assume that keeping everything in a constant 70 degrees is good, but that's an assumption. We actually don't know that, and we forget what we actually could be losing out on: opening the windows, cuddling up on the couch with a spouse or your kids, or just experiencing slight discomfort. Actually, this is something that hit someone mentioned to me, and it made a lot of sense. The ideal human temperature, like for human comfort, is 76 degrees. I know that sounds a little warm, but apparently it's 76 degrees. Um, and regardless whether it was 70, 76, doesn't really matter. But maximum human pleasure is not staying at 76 degrees; it's at arriving at 76 degrees, because
hmm.
it's arriving into comfort. Like, if you're cold and then you warm up, if you're hot and then you cool off, and that goes for life, right? Like, the maximum human pleasure is not being full, it's actually eating to become full, because we're really not meant as humans, I think, to be like in a static environment. So we're so obsessed with comfort and being comfortable all the time, but it's actually making us unhappy.
Yeah. We our air conditioner we had not had on until maybe 2.5 3. I don't, Nick, I texted you when we went to turn on, but we hadn't had our air on all summer until like 2 3 weeks ago. And my wife, like, we were just, it wasn't that hot. We get a breeze throughout the house, and we just hadn't turned it on. It hadn't been that humid. And my wife texted me when I was at work and was like, "Where's the dehumidifier?" And I was like, "Out in my shop." "Why?" And she's like, "Well, it's getting hot in the house." And I'm like, "Well, why don't you turn the air conditioning on?" And like at that point, we realized that our brand new air conditioning was not working. But like once we turn the air on for the summer, it doesn't go off.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
it'll be on for the rest of the summer now, because it's like, I don't
You
wanna turn it down and then the
right.
house get humid and then open all the windows and shut them. And, like, that's like, my house was not designed that way. It's an old house. There was no air conditioning. It was meant to have the windows open and have cross ventilation and a breeze. But, like, in today's day and age, I take my house and we shut the windows and we close it up, and that's it until the fall, where we have a couple weeks where we can open our windows up and enjoy the fall weather, and then it gets closed up again for winter. And I
Yeah.
I I think that we're just accustomed and used to that, and that's not necessarily the way that it should be. But we are designing houses now essentially to like not open the window. I mean, even cars.
Exactly.
Dude, like if you try to open a single window in a car while driving nowadays, you get that wind buffeting where like the whole
Yeah.
old cars weren't like that.
Yeah,
Like they
'cause they
were
were
Yeah, you gotta
leaky.
engineers.
open every window and your sunroof for it to stop.
Dude, that's the
Yeah.
only thing you can do, but, like, it's because nobody puts their windows down in cars anymore, so they don't give a shit if you can't open a window in your like, my kids, the window lock's on all the time because as soon as
Yep.
you're driving and they put one window down, it's like, and it's obnoxious, right? But, like, go in any car before like, from 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you put the windows down and, like, they drive perfectly fine with the windows
Yep.
down.
That's a great one. I hadn't thought of that one.
Yeah, it's crazy because like, they just don't care now. It's not a concern that you cannot drive with your windows down in your
Yeah.
car unless you have every window cracked.
S- And see, going back to the house side of this with the air sealing, I can't help but wonder how long, and I don't know the answer to this, but how long will these houses stay airtight?
Well,
Because,
right.
like
That's
zip tape,
yeah.
right? Like on the, I always laugh because like on the zip board, it's like 30-year warranty, and I really want to make an ad of like, I don't know, the pyramids next to 30-year the 30-year warranty, be like, hold my beer,
Yeah.
30 years, like for a building is not like, building has almost become too easy that we just treat it so cheaply, even though it's incredibly expensive and resource intensive, even with stick framing. But like that zip tape, like it seems like an incredible material, right? And it's sticky and it's tough, but in 40, 50 years, what is that going to look like? All the stuff around our jams and things and the petroleum products, since they're cracking, getting salts and UVs and condensation, what happens over time? And then once you build a house that's designed to be airtight, and then it's no longer airtight, then what starts happening? And I'm guessing you also have health consequences again, right? Of
Mhm.
mold and mildew and things like that getting trapped. Um,
That I mean,
it's like,
it's a very that's a serious concern, and that's a big reason why we stopped using spray foam. Where
yeah,
it's like we had a project that, install went great, and 6 months later, we happened to be on the job, and we were up in the attic, and it all shrunk to the tune of, like, 1 to 3 inches.
wow, I haven't
And,
seen that before.
and at the end of the day, people are like, "Well, what was the conditions?" It's like, "Yeah, they sprayed it in the winter. The roof was probably too cold." But these are the things that happen, is that you're spraying, I don't wanna be this anti-spray foam guy because that's just not who I am, but you are relying on 2 guys in a truck to mix it properly, to know the relative humidity or the humidity in the building, the temperature of the surface it's being sprayed at all points, the walls, the roof, the floor, whatever, the sills, the air temperature, everything. Like all of that stuff has to be perfect for that chemical reaction to happen. And not only happen and be successful in the moment, but also have longevity.
I mean, I don't wanna knock insulation guys either, but the guys that they're generally having do that, like, they're not paying them top dollar. If you see the
Right.
guys who
It's
are
labor.
yeah, the guys
Yeah.
who are doing that, like, they're not some and there's obviously an exception to that, but, like, the insulation trade is not a highly sought after trade for people who are like,
Right.
Like I went
"This
to
is what
school
I
for
wanna
chemical
do."
engineering. I
Yeah,
want to
I
go
wanna go in
spray
a crawl
walls.
space and in an attic and deal with
When it's
itchy
really
and, like,
freaking
nasty
hot. Or,
yeah.
yeah.
So, like, you're expecting these people to go in and want to be doing the best level of work, and you're setting them up for failure. Like,
I talk about this. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, that's that go ahead.
This is actually another point that I kind of I talk about a lot is we're creating every 3 years when the new building code's out. Guess which direction it's going? More complexity. It's
Hmm.
always more complexity. It's never less.
Hmm.
And you guys who pay really close attention, right? And we do too. We can build a good house, but even still, things happen to you guys where you walk in and the spray foam's shrunk 3 inches. Well, guess what? Most of the industry is not as attuned as we are, is not as, So if you want to create, it's great that in a theoretical model, you can build this perfect house, but when you're relying, the construction industry is a messy industry. It's, hundreds of people involved with building a house. And the more complex you make it, the more likelihood there is for mistakes. And so I think there should actually be an argument. How do we make buildings simpler, like the simple details, like you're talking about? Because all the flashing and all that's really complex to actually pull off correctly. Can people pull it off correctly? Yes. Do most people? No.
No. No, like I'm running into it right now where the issue is with stucco, and it's because we build with stucco today than we did before, and people don't know how to detail a drainage plane or their window trim and their flashings and everything together. And you look back to like Tudor homes that have multiple layers of wood trim on top of each other with blockings, and they're diagonal, and
Yep.
they were built so simply that they hold up. The wood doesn't rot,
Yep.
and like those houses breathe. And again, I understand that there's like a need to be more energy efficient, but it does come down to at what cost. Like the overall life cycle of a house, when you look at a house that's built, if you use modest construction techniques, right? I look at a house from 150 years ago. There's a structural sheathing. They put tar paper and then um, cedar shingles on top of that. No breather layer, nothing. But the house, like with the insulation that was in there, it vented in, it dried out, and like what overall that house is going to last 200 years, like
Yep.
250 years, and the exterior would not need a major renovation other than maintenance. And we're building these houses that are airtight now, and how long are they going to last? Are they going to last that long? And also, like you said, at some point they're going to leak. All these adhesives and these membrane waterproofings that we're using, and the worst thing that you can do when you have water is to seal everything up
Yeah,
airtight.
exactly.
So like
And water is going to get in. It's a matter of when.
yeah, and now there's no place for that water to go.
Yep.
So it's just like the classic issue that I see all the time is people have a leak, and so they caulk everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, so you did manage bulk water intrusion for a
Yep.
certain amount of time. It will take care of that, but you're still going to get some water, and now you just can't see it, and now it can't dry out. So like while you don't have water coming into your living room, now it's just living in your walls and your ceiling and not being able to get out and creating mold and health issues and everything else.
Yep.
And it really is something to consider. And when you look at, you know, the overall cost as far as environmental impact and financial impact of the way that we're building to make these houses so energy efficient, um, it 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 does a lot of times come down to lobbying and bureaucracy and everything else. And it's like, whose interest do they actually have in mind through all of this?
Yeah.
Because I'm and there's a lot of people who argue this, and I just feel there has to be some middle ground. It can't be one way or the other. And I have trouble seeing how it's going to make its way there. Like I love what you're doing. I love the way that Nick builds. I love the way that I build, and we want to do things right. But for most of the people who are willing to spend money on a home or a renovation, we're a very niche
Mhm.
sector of that, right? So like I often wonder like what is our actual impact going to be? Where I know you had the conversation with Clay where it's like you have to go off on your own after this, and the purpose of that is to build and have a bigger impact than just Clay doing this. Right now he teaches you, and with the hopes that you're going to teach somebody and that person's going to teach somebody. But when your career's over, what's your actual impact? Like all of our impact's very limited.
Yep.
It's not like nationwide that everyone's going to take over building this way.
Yep.
And that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow for me, and sometimes it can be um a little bit disconcerting, just thinking about like we're putting all this effort in and all this work, and I look at them like at the end of the day, what's it really all gonna do?
No, I think that's a great point, and it is something I think about. But I can't help, and maybe this is just the optimist in me, that we are at this odd time in society just between culture and economics and environmental stuff and politics and um, just how people are feeling, even that it almost seems like the time is ripe for, like I said, one of these subcultures to actually break out into the mainstream. And by the way, the new urbanists have done it. When they were building Seaside in the 80s, everyone thought they were insane. And then 10 years later, every developer was flocking there because it was some of the most valuable real estate in the country. And one of our houses in Carlton Landing just resold for $573 a foot, which that's hard to tell in a national market, but for here, that's really high, and people are valuing this house, these brick houses more, as and so I think, I don't know what the critical mass is, but for example, this development I'm talking about, because one of the things that I care about creating places with buildings, not just individual buildings, but how those buildings create spaces and places, which doesn't make sense in every case, right? If you're building on half-acre lots or acre lots, that's different. But when you can create a compelling alternative and show people something that draws in people's emotions and things like that, because once again, people spend billions of dollars just in the US to fly over to Italy for a week so they can experience great architecture and urbanism and food. And then they come home and they don't question it. Well, I want to make people question it. Why don't we build differently? Why do we keep building this crappy freaking strip centers and these freaking drive-throughs? Like, there's this road that's about a mile from downtown Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City, most people don't know this, but it's the 20th largest city in the US. Well, over the past 2 years, I think there's been like 10 fast food drive-throughs opened up, and it's not even like old school fast food. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but they're almost like, I don't know, 15 feet by 20 feet buildings with a massive parking lot and drive through and no actual indoor
Yeah.
seating, because it's just for the cars to circulate through. And I'm like, we're building these
2
in the
lanes.
20th largest city in the US, in the wealthiest society in the history of the world, and this is the best that we can dream of? Like, what we have built in the past inspired people. It lifted the human spirit. It still inspires us to this day, and so I think we can get back to that place. Maybe. I mean, I'm going for broke, I guess you could say. So
No, I mean, so when it comes to, so you had this revelation in your late 20s, that you wanted to change and you wanted to find meaning in what you're doing, meaning in life, and you've obviously adopted that with what you're doing now, and you're both feet in, you've jumped, you're not, you've gone all in on this. When it comes to your impact and your legacy, is it what you just mentioned about building places rather than homes? Like, what do you see throughout your career as what you're able to leave behind? Like, why are you doing all of this?
no, it's a great. Okay, so there's a bigger answer to this, but it's because we're against, like, working against, there's so many things working against us right now. But I mean, one, the trade base is dying. Like, you don't have young people going to the trades anymore. But people that are working on our houses, and obviously not just our houses, there's other great builders here and great architects, and you guys, for example. But I mean, when trades get the opportunity to work on something good, man, they get excited.
Yeah.
And so I imagine one, and like a robust apprenticeship program. Like, we've got some Votex and things that are just, they're trying to teach people from a freaking classroom how to lay brick. It's like, dude, you got a big, and I was talking to one, and they were like, "Oh, we're limiting our class to 12 people because that's all we can fit in the classroom." I'm like, "You're training them to be masons. Go out to the parking lot and start laying brick. What are you doing? You're not helping them by keeping them in the classroom. The whole reason they're not going to college is because they don't want to be in a classroom
Yeah.
reading a book." So I think there's this whole thing, and of course, you've got just a bunch of disenfranchised young men and like 7 million able-bodied men out of work. So how do you bring meaning back into the trades? And that's by meaningful architecture and meaningful building. So I think I would really like to, and I'm not there yet because it's going to take time and resources, to have a robust apprenticeship program that's not just teaching people masonry, but maybe they go through 2 years of 3-month rotations hitting different kind of subs, or different kind of trades, and then the third year they're specializing, and in the fourth year they're further specializing and also learning business and how to, and this is kind of crazy, but a lot of people don't know how to open a bank account, or do some basic things, manage their personal finances. Like, how do you actually help people build lives for themselves? So there's that aspect of what I want to do. Then there's, we're design build, because I think that the industry has gotten very hyper fragmented as well, where it's just all about like liability protection, and so it's become a difficult industry to operate in. So having a more holistic process where you're develop, design, build, and getting to control all of that, then actually vertically integrating and owning a brick plant and owning a wholesale and retail store, and talking at the universities at OU and OSU. And we go up to we have for the past couple of years gone up to Notre Dame to speak every year in a classroom. And so it's getting the word out, and also building. Once again, it's creating compelling alternatives, because you can point your finger about what's going wrong all day long. But I found that when someone walks into something different and when they see that compelling alternative, that actually is what pulls on their heartstrings. Because there's an emotional aspect to it. And I'm not saying to be manipulative. I mean, to stir the soul kind of thing in a good, positive way. I don't know. So that's a hard question to answer, but I don't know how far I'll get in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
I don't.
I
Yeah.
really love what you said, honestly, like, and I wrote it down to bring meaning back into the industry is very concise, very direct to the point, and it's very well put, because that is something that is missing. We're all talking about pay, and benefits, and something to be, but like realistically, it is bringing meaning back into what you're doing. I have a buddy who's 25 and he works for a contractor, and they do a lot of the same type of jobs. And he texted me the other day. He's like, I realized why I'm miserable at work a lot of the time. And I was like, why? And he's like, because I just do the same shit. I put up the same shitty casings, the same shitty baseboards, and it's every job. And there's just no priority to make anything nicer. It's just what was here. Let's keep going with that. And he's like, by the time lunchtime hits, I'm ready to go home. He just feels like he's there. He's not serving himself doing this. And if he were to have more meaning to what he was doing, or the people who are in commercial construction building these drive-throughs, like, are they proud of what they're like when they get done that job? Or they're like, that's a really nice drive-through Taco Bell, like, that's beautiful. Like, the facade on this building is just, it looks like, what are we giving them? And you look back 100 years ago, what people were getting done building these homes that may have been modest but had traditional details, and their heart and soul went into this. And it's like, yeah, they probably were very proud of what they were doing, or whether it was building bridges or cutting roadways, or really having an impact on the people around them, where it's like, yeah, you just built a combination Pizza Hut and Taco Bell. Like, are you like, you've just served society by doing that, right?
Right.
Like, do you feel better about yourself because you've brought the combination restaurant to the masses? Um, and I don't think that we're doing that for people. And the other thing that I really like that I heard you discuss on another podcast was that vertical integration, like where you said right now it's really hard for you to get these tumbled bricks. And
Yeah.
most of the brick that you're working with is, I think of it like when I think of a school, where it's just this like perfectly square edged,
Yep.
red, homogeneous brick that you see. And that's not like that. Does, if you put that on a house, it just looks like a McMansion. It
Yep.
looks like a builder's grade house. And you're trying to put this tumbled, recycled, repurposed, or just traditional brick up, and it's really hard for you to get that. So being able to have enough of an industry locally to support having your own brick plant, or like you said, getting a team of masons together, where it's like, maybe you're not building as many houses, but you're able to have a team of masons that you can help other builders build houses as well, where you're supporting the industry. So I do find that super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think, like, from a scalability perspective, that may be the ticket for you, because what your impact may be, being that you started doing this essentially when you're 30, and like, how much time do we actually have to make a massive impact? So how many homes can you build at this scale when they're all handmade,
Mm.
and it takes time to do these, and you're not pumping these out? But it's like, you train a team of masons to make it easier for other people to build this way, or
Yes.
make the availability of traditional brick easier and less expensive than having to source this from all different states and then get it brought in. Like, that makes it easier for the entire country to build in this way. And I think that you could have a much greater impact doing that, while still fulfilling your own personal growth and needs through building the homes that you
Right.
want to be, and the developments that you want to build.
And that's a great point what you're making there, because I agree. My vision is not to just build as many houses as I can build or we can build as building culture. It's how do you make it accessible for other people? And one of those is we don't do this right now because we just don't have the capacity. But I do want to run a really large mason. How would you get more building out there, like masonry buildings out there, without just me building all of them? You make it accessible for other builders. So if we had masonry crews that could basically build the shell for like a normal
Mhm.
architect, normal builder, say, hey, well, we're the brick experts. You don't have to be the brick experts. We'll come in, mass up your house, and then you finish it out just like you would otherwise. That's absolutely a way. And then you mentioned something else about just scale and um, replicating. I guess I don't think it was in a podcast, but I talk about Leon Creer. He talks about how biological organisms grow until maturity, and then they stop growing, and then they grow through replication by reproduction. And he compares that to cities. Even that cities aren't really meant to grow indefinitely. They should really grow into maturity and then replicate and then be connected to each other. So it's more like whole, complete places rather than just this gigantic thing that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Because you know how, like, as a human, you can't just scale up a human because the proportions stop working. Your knees would start buckling. Your knees would have to get bigger if you were going to be 3 times the size. And I can't remember what the math there is or anything, but I think about that in terms of this. It's not about us becoming some giant national builder. I do want to be a big enough builder that we can create complete places, you could say, but then it's about inviting other people in because it's actually
Mm.
not that hard. I can take a conventional masonry crew and build a mass wall masonry building with them. I did it just a couple years ago. I'd never worked with them. They'd never done any structural masonry. And was it an extra effort? Yeah, because I was having to be there more to show them things. But it's really not that hard. So that's what I want to do. Is in time, I'm just so busy. I'm like 60-hour plus weeks and 80, 60-hour weeks for the past 8 years.
But
But I
is
want to
there
get to the point where I can do trainings and videos and things. And hey, here's what you need to build mass wall. And I can send you the tools, I can send you the videos and all that kind of stuff. And we will get there, but we're a few years out.
and I think, like, there will always be that side. This is where I balance my thought process, where the handcrafted, like, hand built homes, there's that will always be desirable.
Yep.
But the reality is it will be very hard. It would be very hard to continue to build and replace the masons that are in fact retiring. Like, we'll never replace all of them, which is a big reason why we don't build as much with masonry. Like, that's just a known fact. So where my mind goes is, yeah, we can continue to build these by hand, but how do we automate that process? We watch these printers printing homes with concrete, 3D printers. It's like, could you do that with masonry?
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is because I'm watching a house go up right now, and I saw it happen on commercial, and now I'm seeing it in residential, where they have that stainless steel track that gets screwed to the zip wall, and then they're thin bricks, and they go in, they click, 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 click,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
you're watching them do an entire wall in a matter of 4 hours, and then they go
Yeah.
back with a grout bag and they grout it and tool it, and it looks like it's a solid brick wall. And I'll never. I texted my friend. I'm like, "Are you shitting me?" I'm like, "This house has been marketed as this brick house. Look at what they're doing," and they were like,
It's
"Of
a
course."
tiled house.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
they're like
basically what
they're
it
like,
is.
"Nick, of course they are. It's way more inexpensive."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Yeah, I
And that's
know.
what,
But
yeah.
it's not a brick like, it's not a brick house.
It's not a
Like,
brick
even
house."
from just,
And
like, a
get
sound
But guess what?
perspective.
From the insurance company, like, they
No
they they
way.
say
Even,
insurance companies, give you a break when it's a brick house. I'm
yeah.
sure they'll get that break.
Yeah. This is part of what happens when so much, it's not even about the total price, it's people obsessing over price per foot,
Mm,
which I'm sure
yeah.
you guys have to deal
Oh,
with,
yeah.
and it's so freaking annoying. It's like I can build a box as cheap as the other guy. I can build
That's not
cheap
what you're
space.
asking
I can,
for.
right, that's not what you're asking for. And to try to compare things, people don't know that they're not comparing apples to apples, but it's kind of insane. Like, you don't buy a car based on, the volume price per, I don't know, cubic volume of a
Yeah.
car. Like, granted, bigger cars can cost more, but not always, and it really depends on the quality. You can buy a Toyota or you can buy a Mercedes. They're exact same size, but they're very different vehicles. But by the way, at least a Toyota runs well
Mm,
versus like when our cheap building doesn't run well.
mhm.
Cheap building is really cheap.
Yeah, that's an interesting vantage point as well, and I'm thinking, like, cost of a box truck versus a luxury
Yeah.
car, right? Where it's like there's a big difference there, even though the box truck has a lot more space to it, where there's just so many different things to consider. And again, you can't just cast a blanket over the entire industry. But I find it super interesting as to what you're doing. I love old school building methods and being able to integrate newer technology into them. It's not like you're building a house that isn't up to code, that isn't up to date, and what you're doing. It's really cool to see. And I think that what you're doing is very honorable for the industry, for people coming into this, and you're giving them an opportunity to have meaning with what they're doing. So I would definitely encourage you to keep it up. It's really cool. And like it brought me back to having our conversation with Clay and being like, holy shit, like the fact that people are doing this throughout the country is super cool, super admirable, and just like revitalizes me to see what you're able to do.
Well, thank you. It's certainly fun to follow you guys too, just because, talking to people and that just care,
Mm.
and are always looking. Because for me, it's not a one size fits all. Like every house in the country should be mass wall masonry, right? Like, no, there's different places for different things, but it's always about how do we improve, and not just improve in this narrow way, but like being able to step back and think about the state of the industry and where do we want to really, that's what it should start with, is where do we want to be as a
Mhm.
society, and then backtrack into how do we get there. And that's what we've lost in the code. It's just everything's kind of like pushing slowly forward and no one even knows where we're going.
Yeah, and like even with respect to that, it's like there is a time and a place for what you're building. And I was listening to something where you mentioned where it's like you could take the most beautiful, ornate, traditional building in the world, and if it's in the wrong location, people are like, "What the
Mhm.
hell is that?" Right? So
Mhm.
like,
Yep.
this has to be done methodically, and this has to be done intentionally, and you have to figure out where this works, and it's not set up for everything, and every neighborhood shouldn't be this way, but there are considerations to how we're building, and it's not just taking a house and plopping it wherever you want to. Like there has to be considerations for the environmental impact, where it's going, what the style is, and in order for you to do that, you're looking to control this and building in a small, like you said, a pocket neighborhood or a small area where you're able to create this neighborhood. And I think that that's the ticket as well.
Yeah.
And I think that you will have your greatest impact there, because if you look at your overall footprint of this new development that you're looking to do in 1 acre, and how many townhomes you're going to be putting in there, and the way that you're going to build them and how long they're going to last, there's not much else that's going to go on that 1 acre parcel that you could argue is more sustainable than that.
Right. Right.
And that's
Even if
really
they were
cool.
uninsulated, they are
Yeah.
insulated for the record, but
No, but that's like super cool, right? And you're doing that, building a way that they've built for 500 years.
yeah.
And like to argue that there's not much more than they can put on that 1 acre parcel with today's technologies and building methods that's more sustainable long term and durable long term is pretty crazy to think.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like a testament to not always reinventing the wheel.
Totally. And it's
Well,
very fun too. I mean, that's a fun thing about structural masonry. You can do in a veneer, you got made, 3 and 5/8 inches thick to work with. And for example, corbelling it means, for like listeners, is like I don't know, stepping out with the brick, you could say. And you can, by code, you can step out half the width of the wall. So on a brick veneer that's about 3 and 5/8, you can step out, less than 2 inches. But in structural masonry, if you're building a 12-inch wall or a 16-inch wall, you can step out 6 inches, 8 inches, and
Yeah.
that allows you to do some really cool stuff. And you also have the thickness of wall to take away and to do negatives. And so you can get these really deep shadow lines, because some of the problems with modern buildings is they're so shallow, where the walls the windows just like pasted on. Everything's so just linear and plain, like no shadows. That's what makes things interesting, is the depth and the shadows. Just like you're talking about your 2.5 foot wall of the your was that your friend's house, or
yeah. Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and you don't notice, it's not until you have the conversation or you show somebody that juxtaposition between like, hey, this is what you can do with a structural brick wall, and this is the max depth that you can create with a brick veneer that people will start to pick that up. And now it's like every building you can see that they try and create some architectural detail, and you're like, I get it, but it's just not substantial enough, and like
Yeah.
that's why.
Yep.
And it's the same thing. It's the same thing with like moldings and everything else and the materials that we've switched to at this point. And it's like, well, why can't you have that deep cut of a profile? And it's like, well, because the entire stock that you're milling from is only 5/8 of an inch thick. So like, how
Yeah.
much detail and depth and
Right.
shadow do you want?
Yeah.
Um, and it's just, it is cool to see that, and I love that, and I do love the old school methods and what you're doing. So I definitely encourage you to keep it up and keep up your enthusiasm, because I think it's going to be contagious for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Well, I appreciate it.
I would second that, Austin. I mean, you're obviously extremely enthusiastic about what you're doing now, and to hear that you stepped away from a career that you were making good money, and to pursue a passion, hopefully encourages someone that might be, in that uh, uncomfortable realm of it doesn't suck enough for me to quit. And maybe hearing something like your story will get them to put their nose to the grindstone and move into a 400 square foot house for a little bit with an AC, maybe an AC unit in the window or not, and go after what they want.
So
Yeah, no, it's worth it.
where can people find you if they want to come be an apprentice?
Well, unfortunately, one day I cannot wait to make the announcement. One day we're doing this because I've got all sorts of plans. I'm like, it's gonna be like boot camp for the first 3 months, where it's just like everyone's like in bunk rooms and just like they're on curfew. I don't know. It just depends on the age and stuff of people coming in. But
Curfew.
so we're not doing apprenticeships yet. But I'm hoping that could be like realistically in 4 to 5 years. I think we could be in a good place to do that. But our website, buildingculture.com, and our Instagram is honestly where we post the most and talk about what we're doing and our philosophy and all of that. So follow us along there.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, building culture, and that's your Instagram handle.
Yep. Yep.
Cool.
On
Yeah.
that and
So,
Twitter and stuff. I get a little feisty on Twitter sometimes.
uh oh.
People when they make stupid comments. So.
Yeah, I'm sure it's par for the course. But we appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on, and it's enjoyable to see what you're doing.
Well, thanks, guys. It's really good to be on here and love what y'all are doing, just on the building side and also with this podcast. Just talking to people and spreading once again, it's for me, it's that exploring like what is better ways of doing things, and I think that's just super valuable. So for everyone, but
Awesome, man.
Oh yeah, man.
well,
Well,
thanks,
Good
guys.
good
love
luck
to.
with everything, and hopefully we can talk to you soon.
Yeah, I was gonna
Sounds
say,
great.
love to have you back on soon.
Sounds good. Well, Nick, Tyler, good talking to you, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks,
Cool.
man.